seen history materials, oh my, laid out in the most unique ways. I talked to one homeschool mom, and I asked her one day, I said, how do you approach your history? Well, she chooses an event for every month, and that's how she organizes her history. So in the month of September, I can't remember what the event was, but for example, in November, she teaches Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims. And then in December, her history lessons are all about Christ's birth. And in March or April, when Easter happens, she teaches all about Christ's life and the resurrection. And so her history was all over the place, all out of order. So President's Day in February, you would teach Washington and Lincoln, and it's like, that sounds really kind of interesting to approach it that way, but totally impractical. Our children get this hodgepodge understanding of our history, and they don't understand causes and effects and the relationship of events and individuals to each other. So we do teach our history in a chronological order, all right? And I've also heard the question, how can I teach the same link without repeating myself over and over? I don't want my children to hate the Pilgrim's story because they've heard it so many times. Or I don't want them to be bored by George Washington because they've studied him every year for the last 6 years and done exactly the same thing. So hopefully the next couple of slides that we look at will help you to see how this can be done. On the chart in Mr. Rose's Guide to American Christian Education, and that is also in the Mighty Works of God history books, the 9 links are identified at the top of a column. And as we go down that column, we see at each grade level a suggestion for what you might do at that grade level with that link. I picked creation for an example. So in kindergarten, children can learn about God's principle of individuality. They don't memorize the statement of the principle. They don't 4R it, look up the keywords in the definition, but they learn that God made everything with variety. They learn God made me special, like no one else you see. They learn about God's individuality. Then in the next year, they can learn that man is God's property. Because God created me, I belong to him. And they can begin learning about geographic individuals. God made each continent unique and special. Each continent has a unique purpose in God's plan. And then in the second grade year, they can see more of God's character revealed in creation. And some of these are expanded, some in the guide, but just to go through it quickly, you can kind of get the idea. The next year, they would deal with the origin and dispersion of the races. So they would review quickly, perhaps, the ideas they learned in other years, but then they go on to something new. Then in fourth grade, they can learn about the establishment of civil government. Does someone know, when did God give the first commands regarding civil government? I can't hear, I'm sorry. Not civil government. Just after the flood, when God was giving commands to Noah, and he told him that if a man takes a life, by man shall his blood be shed. So that was the first institution of civil government. So that would be a different emphasis for that year. In the fifth grade, they may study the Christian and pagan ideas of man and government. All right, and then in the sixth grade, creation versus evolution. So you can see every year they are approaching that creation link from a different approach. Different events, different individuals, different ideas. But I thought it's helpful too to look across the chart and see, all right, I understand that, how that works. So for an example, what would my children in second grade study? And I picked second grade because my daughter's in second grade right now. This is the history that I am teaching this year. So for creation, they would study God's character revealed in creation, his infinity, his diversity, his individuality. With Moses and the law, God preparing Moses to lead the children of Israel. And this applies to the last 80 years of his life, particularly, and the principle of representation. And then Christ, the focal point of history, that Jesus coming changed history. And we can learn about before Christ and after Christ, BC, AD, and all of those things. Paul and the westward movement of Christianity. Paul's internal change. Again, we're thinking cause and effect. Internally, Paul was a persecutor. He had hate in his heart for God's people. So externally, he was a persecutor. After God changed Paul's heart, he had a love for believers. And he took on the task of being a missionary and a writer. We thank the Lord for the writings that we have from Paul. Then with the Bible in English, the children at this age have hopefully had some training on Wycliffe and Tyndale, and this year they get to study the Geneva Bible. What makes it unique? And then with Christopher Columbus, if we're following the chart the way it's laid out, they've already studied Columbus himself, so we're actually backing up in time a little bit to study Marco Polo, because Marco Polo and his work prepared the way for Columbus. Is this making sense, I hope? With the Pilgrims, they can learn about America's heritage of Christian character, particularly emphasizing their faith and steadfastness and their diligence and industry. Wonderful examples to us of what we ought to be. And then with the Patriot and the Declaration of Independence, America becoming an individual nation. And then the Pioneer Movement, which includes many, many things, because this covers such a long time span. We have Lewis and Clark with the nation expanding. And the gospel goes to the West. We see missionaries who took the gospel across our nation. We have the idea of one nation under God, with the country as the states became part of the Union and were united together. The Statue of Liberty is included in the study. It's actually even on the cover of the Liberty and Justice book, which is recommended at this age. And then the fact that we have liberty in our nation, liberty and justice for all. Do you have any questions about that overview before I go on to some specifics of lessons? All right. No. Good. Before I change that slide, though, I want to talk just a little bit about lessons. We want to teach lessons that teach our children an idea or a principle through reading, instruction, and written work. Now, I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes a few pages of some student written work, and we'll talk about the leading idea that would go along with that. You will hear that say that word, the leading idea. That's the idea that's the most important for this lesson. It's what I want them to remember at the end of the day. Some leading ideas we will repeat over and over throughout the year because they're that important. Repetition brings it back to our mind, doesn't it? That remembering.